So you want to grow roses from seed and you have ripe rose hips, but what do we need to do with them once they are ripe? Jeff the Rose Dude here, and in this video we'll be going over the next steps of what to do with the hips and getting the seeds out and cleaned. I did a video previously on the 6 basic steps of breeding and growing roses from seed, so make sure that you check that out. This video is on the 3rd step, which is collecting the seeds and getting them cleaned. So what we're going to do is get some of these ripe rose hips off of the plant, we'll take them inside, and we will go from there. All right, so now that we've gotten our ripe rose hip, it is very important that we get the seeds out of it. There's a lot of videos out there where they are showing just planting the rose hip inside the soil and then things start germinating. It isn't necessarily the case. It is important that we get the seeds out. Now, there are a ton of different ways that you can get seeds out, but the most important thing is just getting them out, right? Some people like to use blenders on low speed. Some people like to use knives to cut into it. And I like to use just scissors to get into the rose hip, to cut into it. And the seeds are very hard, so you don't have to worry about damaging the seeds when cutting into it. They just kind of move out of the way. So I like to use scissors, and I just cut about 3/4 of the way into the hip. And then what I do is just kind of pull it apart. And that is what the inside of a rose hip looks like. Now, it is really important because on the inside of the rose hip, you can see the seeds, but there's also a ton of fibers in here. And it's really important that we get the fibers out. But make sure that if you have sensitive skin, that you wear gloves. The fibers can cause irritation to your skin for a lot of people. So if you have sensitive skin, please wear plastic gloves when working with the inside of a rose hip. Now, because I did cut into the hip, I'm just breaking it apart a little bit and just using my fingers and my fingernails to pull the seeds out of the rose hip. And here's what a seed looks like once it is taken out of the rose hip. You will notice that there's a lot of fibers on the seed and on my fingers, and you will notice that there's also a piece of hip flesh that is still stuck on the seed. So it is very important now that we wash the seeds. And there's a ton of different ways that we do that. We just have to make sure that the fibers are off of the seed, because the fibers will inhibit the seed from actually germinating. So it is important that we get that off, and we want to get all the little pieces of hip flesh off of the seed as well, because that's not doing the seed any good, and it can cause the seed to end up rotting before it germinates. Now, what I like to do is use a metal strainer, just put my seeds in here, and I run it underneath water from the sink. And while I do that, I'm going to scrub the seeds against the metal strainer. That kind of acts like a sandpaper, and it helps loosen up any debris that is on the seeds. And while it's under running water, it's also washing off and rinsing off all of the fibers that are still on the seed. And here are the seeds after they have been washed. Now, the next step that I like to do with the seeds is perform what is called a float test, where I basically get a cup and fill it up with water, and I'm going to drop the seeds in the water to see which of the seeds will sink and which ones will float. So you'll notice that some of the seeds sank while others stayed floating. Now, a general rule of thumb is that the seeds that float are not going to germinate nearly as well as the seeds that sink. So you have a couple different options that you can do with the seeds that float. You can either throw them away, or I always suggest, if this is the first time that you are growing roses from seed, or if you don't have a lot of seed to begin with, to work with, or you are getting seeds from a particular variety of rose, the hips, for the first time, I do suggest keeping the seeds, but keeping them separated from the seeds that sink. Then that way, when you plant both groups of seeds, you can tell firsthand if that general rule applies to this variety's seeds. So just keep them separated, plant them separately, and then you can see how well the seeds that floated, how well they germinate versus the seeds that sink. So in that way, the following year, when you are getting seeds from the same variety, if the seeds didn't germinate for you, that ended up floating, then you can be a lot more comfortable and confident in throwing the seeds away. Now, these seeds are ready for the next step, which is cold stratification. But it is important to know when you want to start stratifying your seeds. We want to keep these seeds moist and cool for about 12 weeks before they are planted and start germinating. So sometimes it may be a little bit too early for you to start stratifying your seeds, and you may want to wait a little while before you do begin the stratification process. In this case, like me, I am waiting to stratify these seeds in about a month. So in the meantime, I do want to store these seeds. So there is a really important step that I need to do to properly store these seeds. So let's go over that. So what we want to do to properly store the seeds is we want to make sure that they're completely dry prior to storing. Any kind of moisture can cause the seeds to rot, and then we don't have any successful germination from rotted seeds, right? So I like to put the seeds on a paper towel, and I will place another paper towel over the top for a couple of days to make sure that they are completely dry. And after the seeds are completely dry, then I just place them in a Ziploc baggie, and I'm going to keep them in here until I start stratifying them. And that's pretty much the step. We just have to make sure that we get the seeds out of the rose hip and we get them cleaned in order to properly go on to the next step, which is cold stratification. I will be putting a video out on that very soon, so keep your eye open for that. But in the meantime, make sure that you subscribe and you watch these other videos. Have fun with your roses.